Hi, my name is Dr. Frederick Edward Fabella, and I will be discussing the foundations of quantitative research, Part 7, the types. Okay, so choosing the quantitative research type. The type of quantitative research that you will utilize for your study will depend on a number of factors, one of them being the statement of the problem. Also, you need to consider the variables that you wish to study as well as the type of data that you need and the population that you're considering. Okay, so these are the factors that you need to consider. Now, there are four major types of quantitative research. The first one is descriptive, and then you have correlational, and then you have quasi-experimental, and then you have experimental. So let's consider the descriptive type first. So, descriptive research questions simply aim to describe the variables you are measuring. When we use the word describe, we mean that these research questions aim to quantify the variables you are interested in. Okay? So, example, how many calories does a teenager consume each day? Okay. Now, there is a descriptive type called comparative. Okay. And the example of a comparative question is this one. Is there a difference between the calorie consumption of male and female teenagers? Now, let's explore this example. Okay. If you want to come up with a comparative research design, this is what we can do. First, you identify your population. Next, you try to obtain a sample. Of course, you need to use a sampling technique. You may use stratified random sampling. And then you gather your data. How do you do that? You may administer a survey about their calorie consumption. And then after you administer the survey, you analyze your data. You can compare males and females' consumption by using statistical treatment. And then you answer the question, is there a difference? Okay, so this is an example of comparative design under descriptive. All right, let's now consider correlational. Correlational research attempts to establish whether or not a relationship exists between the variables being studied. An example is there a relationship between intelligence quotient and clinical depression? Okay, once again, let's try to explore that question. Let's try to come up with a correlational design. Okay, so again, first you identify your population and then you obtain a sample. Of course, you need to use a sampling technique. This time, we again use the simple random sampling and then you gather your data. How do you do that? On your sample, you administer an IQ test and a depression test. And then you analyze your data. You correlate the scores of the IQ test and the scores of the depression test using statistical treatment. And then you ask the question, is there a relationship? Okay, so this is an example of correlational design. All right, so let's now proceed to quasi-experimental. Quasi-experimental research involves some degree of manipulation of an independent variable to see how it affects a dependent variable. An example is there a difference in the levels of stress before and after a stress management session? So actually, this is a pre-test post-test design, which is quasi-experimental. Once again, let's try to explore that example. Let's try to come up with a pre-test post-test design which is quasi-experimental. First, you identify your population, then you obtain a sample. Of course, you again use a sampling technique, and then you gather your data. How do you do that? You administer a stress questionnaire and note the scores. Okay, so you give that test to your sample, and then after that, you administer the treatment. So, what is our treatment? It is the stress management technique. And then, after the stress management technique, you gather data again. You administer the same stress questionnaire and note the scores. And then you ask the question, is there a difference in the scores? Of course, you will need another form of statistical treatment to answer this question. Okay, so this is an example of pretest post-test design under quasi-experimental. Let's now proceed to experimental. In experimental research, there is an optimal level of control, usually in a laboratory setting, and the manipulation of an independent variable to see whether it influences the dependent variable. Example, is there a difference in the math test scores between subjects who were exposed to music and those who were not? Okay, so let us try to once again explore this example. Let's try to come up with an experimental design. Okay, first you identify your population and then you obtain a sample. And then you divide your sample randomly into two groups. The first group being your control group, and the second group will become your experimental group. And step four will be to expose the control group to a situation where there is no music. While in the experimental group, the situation is with music. And while these are happening, you give the same math test to both groups. Okay, of course, these math tests will yield scores for both groups. And then you ask the question, is there a difference in the scores? Again, you will be able to answer this with statistical treatment. Okay, so that ends my discussion on quantitative research types. If you want to stay updated with my upcoming lectures, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Prof. Eric F. Thank you very much.